Story 1, The Mismatched Teacups. When I moved into my grandmother's old cottage, I thought I'd stay for a week. The plan was simple: clear out her things, meet with the realtor, and go back to the city. But somehow, each mismatched teacup in her china cabinet told a little story. And as the days passed, I started to wonder if she left them for a reason. Every day I'd find a new one tucked away, in drawers, on shelves, even inside an old piano bench. I started drinking tea from each one, imagining where she might have found them. Some were chipped. Some had gold trim, and one, with a painted daisy, had a letter tucked inside. It wasn't a love letter, at least not in the romantic sense. It was to me. A note she wrote before she passed, reminding me to slow down and look between the moments. That phrase stayed with me. So I stayed longer than a week. Then a month. Then I didn't want to leave. I planted daisies outside. I painted the porch. And every time I had tea, I thought of her. That cottage, with its creaky floors and sleepy mornings, became my home. And those teacups? They were her way of showing me where I truly belonged. Story 2, The Neighbor Who Never Left a Note. There was a man next door who never waved. Never smiled. Just kept to himself with his perfectly trimmed hedges and symmetrical flower pots. I used to make up stories about him when I couldn't sleep. Spy? Retired professor? Secret poet? One day, a storm knocked down the fence between our yards. I assumed he'd call someone to fix it immediately. But he didn't. The broken section stayed down for days, and I started to catch glimpses of his backyard, an easel, some scattered canvases, and dozens of garden gnomes. Curiosity got the best of me. One morning I left a small coffee cake on his porch. No note, just a gesture. The next day, a fresh flower in a jar appeared on mine. No card. No words. Just an exchange. It became a quiet ritual. He'd leave a painting of a bird, I'd leave some fresh bread, he'd leave a handmade wooden spoon. We never spoke. Not once. But that silent friendship meant more to me than most conversations I'd had in years. When he moved away months later, I found one final thing on my porch, a painting of my backyard, with a small bird perched on the fence we never fixed. Story 3, The Sound of the Old House. I inherited my aunt's lake house one fall, and for the first few nights, the creaking drove me crazy. It was old, built in the 1930s, and the floor sang a different tune with every step. At first, I thought it was haunted. My aunt always told me the house had a personality. Turns out, she was right. It had moods. When it rained, the attic would smell like cedar. On cold mornings, the walls made popping sounds like they were stretching awake. I started naming the sounds: the wail, kitchen window, the tap-tap, bathroom sink, and old groan, back stairs. One evening, I found a little leather-bound notebook in the floorboard under the bed. In it, my aunt had written down all the noises too, with notes like 3 taps equals morning wind and long creak equals welcome home. Reading it felt like having a conversation with her. Like she was still there, showing me around in her quirky way. It turned out to be the most peaceful place I've ever lived. And eventually, those sounds didn't bother me at all, they soothed me to sleep. Story 4, The Bookstore That Didn't Exist Online, 10 minutes. It was tucked between a laundromat and a dentist's office, no name, no hours posted, and definitely no website. I passed it every day and never saw anyone go in or out. One rainy Sunday, I decided to push the door open. It was warm inside. Dusty, with overstuffed armchairs and piles of books taller than me. There was no clerk. Just a cat sleeping on a table and a bell that didn't ring when I tried it. I stayed an hour. Then another. Each book I picked seemed to match my thoughts. A journal about second chances. A memoir about starting over. A novel where the main character lived alone above a bakery. It was like the shop knew me. When I finally left, the rain had stopped. I came back the next week. And the next. Each time, something new appeared, never anything I was looking for, but always what I needed. Then one day, it was gone. Just an empty building. But I still have the books. And the cat? She started showing up at my back door. I guess the shop left me one last story. Story 5, The Postcards on the Fridge. My grandmother's fridge was covered in postcards. Paris, Tokyo, the Grand Canyon, even Antarctica. But she never traveled. Not once. She was afraid of flying and never left our little town. So one day, I asked her where they all came from. She just smiled and said, I made friends. That's all she would say. Every few weeks, a new card would arrive. Sometimes from someone named Martin in Oslo, sometimes from a woman named Clara who hiked the Alps. They all addressed her as Dear Pen Pal. After she passed, I started digging through her old things. In the back of her closet, I found a wooden box full of letters bundled in ribbon. It turned out she'd been part of a global pen pal club since the 70s. She'd written to people all over the world, and they sent her back glimpses of places she never saw but still cherished. I framed some of the cards. I started writing letters myself. There's something magical about connecting with a stranger through ink and paper. Every time I open my mailbox now, I feel like I'm continuing her quiet little adventure. Story 6, The Woman Who Walked at 6:45. When I moved into my apartment, I noticed her on the second day. A woman in a bright scarf, always walking past my window at exactly 6:45 in the morning. Rain or shine, Monday to Sunday. Same route. Same pace. I started setting my alarm just to watch her walk by. I'd sip my coffee and wonder where she was going. Sometimes she carried a flower. Sometimes a baguette. One day, I waved. She smiled but didn't stop. Then, one week, she didn't walk by at all. I waited for days. Nothing. I felt an odd sense of worry, like missing a character in your favorite book. On the 7th day, she reappeared, but slower. And with a small dog in tow. I couldn't help myself. I stepped outside and said hello. We talked for almost an hour. Turns out she'd had a minor surgery and was just easing back into her routine. The dog? A new companion she'd adopted during recovery. Now we walk together once a week. And though we don't talk much during the walk, it's one of the most peaceful moments of my week. Just quiet steps, shared space, and the comfort of simple company. Story 7, The Yellow Sweater. It was in a donation box at the thrift store, soft, oversized, and the perfect shade of marigold. I bought it without trying it on, just something about it felt familiar. When I wore it, strangers smiled at me more than usual. Then the oddest thing happened. A woman in a bookstore tapped me on the shoulder. She said, I'm sorry, I know this sounds strange, but that sweater used to belong to my sister. I froze. She pointed to a tiny hand-stitched D on the sleeve. I hadn't noticed it before. She told me her sister had passed away years ago, and that sweater had been one of her favorites. I asked if she wanted it back. She shook her head and said, no. But can I hug you? We stood there for a moment, two strangers wrapped in memory. After she left, I sat in the bookstore a long time, holding the sleeve. I never felt lonely in that sweater again. Somehow, it carried a little warmth from someone else's story, and now, it carries mine too. Story 8, The Train Ride with the Red Notebook. I was taking the late train home, tired from work, and barely keeping my eyes open. That's when I noticed the notebook, red leather cover, resting on the seat beside me. I picked it up, expecting to find a name or phone number. Instead, it was a travel journal. Pages filled with small notes and sketches. Places visited, meals eaten, people met. It wasn't organized, just a stream of thoughts. But something about it was enchanting. I took it home, planning to return it somehow. But I kept reading. The author, who never gave a name, wrote things like, the ocean sounds different when you're not in a hurry, and I cried over soup in Lisbon and felt better after. It felt like I was reading someone's soul. 2 weeks later, I found a small envelope tucked into the back pocket of the notebook. It said, "If this finds you, maybe it's supposed to." Inside was a note, "Leave this somewhere else when you're done. Pass the story on." I did just that. I added my own entry, about the night I found it, the peace it gave me, and left it on another train seat. I like to think it's still traveling, collecting quiet moments from strangers like me. Story 9, The Houseplant That Bloomed in Winter. I don't have a green thumb. Every plant I've owned has wilted within a week. So when my aunt gave me a scraggly, almost lifeless plant in a cracked ceramic pot, I expected it to be gone by spring. She called it the stubborn one. I placed it on the windowsill out of guilt more than hope. Watered it occasionally. Talked to it once or twice when I was feeling silly. But I didn't expect anything. Then in late January, when the world outside was frozen and gray, it bloomed. A single, vibrant pink flower, bold and soft at the same time. It felt like a little miracle. I sent a photo to my aunt. She replied, "It only blooms when it knows it's needed." After that, I paid more attention to it. To all the little things, really. I started leaving my phone in another room, watching the way the light moved across the kitchen floor, and reading books with no rush to finish. That plant taught me more about patience than any self-help book ever could. Story 10, The Library with No Computers. Tucked between two apartment buildings was a library that looked like it belonged in another time. Wooden doors, no digital checkouts, no glowing screens, just shelves upon shelves of books and an old man behind the counter with a fountain pen. I stumbled in during a walk, thinking it was a museum. The air smelled like paper and lavender. A sign read, "Choose a book by instinct. We trust you'll bring it back." I picked a weathered novel with no title on the spine. Inside the front cover was a note from someone named Margaret, "This book found me when I needed it most. Maybe it'll do the same for you." It did. It was about a woman who rebuilt her life after walking away from everything familiar. I read it in 3 sittings. When I returned it, I left my own note tucked behind Margaret's. It helped me remember I'm allowed to start over. Now I go back every month. And I never choose by title, only by feel. It's like that place knows what hearts need without asking. Story 11, The Clock That Ran Slow on Purpose. There was a clock in my grandmother's kitchen that was always 7 minutes behind. No matter how many times someone reset it, it would fall back within the hour. We used to tease her about it. "Your clock's lazy," I'd say. She would smile and answer, "No, darling. It's just in no rush." After she passed, I inherited the clock. I thought about fixing it. But then I realized, maybe it wasn't broken. Maybe it was a quiet reminder to slow down. So I hung it in my kitchen, exactly 7 minutes off. And now, whenever I glance at it, I breathe a little easier. It's okay to take your time. To let the world wait a moment longer. That clock doesn't tick to measure time, it ticks to preserve it. Story 12, The Music Box by the Window. When I moved into my new apartment, I found an old music box left behind on a windowsill. It was dusty and delicate, with tiny hand-painted violets on its lid. When I wound it up, it played a tune I didn't recognize, but it was hauntingly beautiful. Every time it played, I felt a sense of calm. I'd sit by the window with a cup of tea, watching the cars below and listening to that melody drift through the room. Something about it felt familiar, though I couldn't place why. Weeks later, I mentioned it to my neighbor, Mrs. Avery, a retired music teacher who had lived in the building since the 60s. Her eyes lit up when I described the tune. "That belonged to Emily," she said. "She lived there before you. She made that music box herself. She played that melody every morning before the sun came up. She told me Emily had been a quiet artist, shy and thoughtful. The kind who left flowers on strangers' doorsteps. She would have liked you," Mrs. Avery said. "You both have that stillness." Now, I wind it up once every night before bed. And every so often, I leave little violets in the stairwell. For Emily, for the music. For the quiet connections that linger long after we're gone. Story 13, The Stranger at the Bench. There's a bench at the edge of the park, under a tree that blooms with white blossoms in spring. I sit there sometimes on Sundays, usually with a coffee and a book I never finish. One chilly afternoon, a man sat beside me. No words. Just a nod. We sat like that for weeks. Always at the same time. He brought sunflower seeds for the birds. I brought cinnamon muffins I rarely ate. One day, he broke the silence. This was my wife's favorite spot. I looked at the tree. It felt different after that, like it carried echoes. The following Sunday, I brought 2 coffees. We talked more. About his wife, my lost job, the feeling of holding sadness like a folded note in your pocket. We didn't solve anything. But it helped. Eventually, he stopped coming. I don't know if he moved, or if, well, I don't ask. But I still sit there. Still bring sunflower seeds. And once in a while, I leave a muffin on the bench beside me. Just in case someone else needs it. Story 14, The Girl with the Red Umbrella. It was raining hard that morning. I was late for work, soaked to the skin, and ready to cry when she appeared, barely 5 feet tall, bright red umbrella, and a smile like she'd just stepped out of a storybook. "You look like you need this more than I do," she said, holding the umbrella over both of us. We shared it for 3 blocks. She told me she was moving out of town that afternoon. "One last walk in the rain before I go," she laughed. I asked why she was so cheerful about leaving. "Because change means I get to be new again." At the corner, she handed me the umbrella. "Pay it forward," she said, and vanished into the coffee shop. I still have it. Haven't used it much. But once in a while, when I see someone struggling in the rain, I offer it with her same smile. Somehow, it still feels like hers. Maybe that's the magic in kindness, it echoes longer than we realize. Story 15, The Cup in the Cabinet. When I inherited my great-aunt's china cabinet, I nearly donated the whole thing. I wasn't into teacups or antiques. But one little cup caught my eye, cracked handle, painted with violets, and rimmed with gold. I kept it. Used it once, just for fun. And somehow, the tea tasted better. I started a new ritual, one quiet evening a week, soft music, a book, and tea in the violet cup. It became my pause button. My stillness. Months later, I found a letter hidden behind a panel in the cabinet. It was written to me, by my great-aunt. "If you're reading this, you kept the cup. I hope you drink joy from it." I cried for an hour. Not sad tears, just the kind that come from being seen, even across time. Now I keep the cup in the window, where the light hits it just right. It reminds me to make space for softness. And to never underestimate the quiet ways love is passed down. Story 16, The Porch Light That Never Went Out. Growing up, there was a house down the road that always had its porch light on. Day and night. Rain, snow, storms. Always lit. We called it the Forever Light. No one lived there for years. It was an old farmhouse, falling apart at the edges. We made up stories about it as kids, ghosts, secret tunnels, hidden treasure. But the truth was quieter. I found out the real story after I moved back to the neighborhood as an adult. I met a woman named Helen at the post office. Turns out, she was the daughter of the original owners. She told me her brother had gone missing in the 70s. My father said he'd leave the light on until he came home. The brother never did. But the light? It stayed. Even after my parents passed, Helen said, we just couldn't bring ourselves to turn it off. Last year, the bulb finally burned out. No one replaced it. And strangely, it didn't feel sad. It felt complete. Like a promise had been kept, even if the ending wasn't what they'd hoped for. Sometimes, love doesn't live in words. It lives in porch lights and quiet choices. In staying hopeful, even when no one's watching. Story 17, The Postcard from the Past. I was cleaning out an old trunk I'd bought at a yard sale when I found a faded postcard, tucked between two yellowed recipe cards. It had no stamp, no return address, just a short note in beautiful handwriting. Meet me where the sun touches the sea. I'll wait. It wasn't signed. I didn't know why, but that line sat with me for weeks. I even taped it to my mirror. There was something romantic about the mystery, not romantic like roses and candlelight, but romantic in that quiet, wistful way that makes you want to walk to the end of the world just to see what's there. Eventually, I took a weekend trip to the coast. I brought the postcard. I sat on the sand and watched the sunset bleed into the water. No one was waiting. But I didn't feel let down. I realized I had met someone there, myself. A version of me I hadn't seen in a while. Softer, slower, still. And that was enough. I left the postcard under a smooth stone on the boardwalk. Maybe someone else will find it. Maybe they'll go, too. Story 18, The Window Seat on the Train. I used to take the early morning train into the city for work. Same route, same stop, same lukewarm coffee in a travel mug. It was routine, until one day, my usual seat was taken. So I picked a window seat in a different car. And that's when I saw her, an older woman across the aisle, knitting something bright yellow. She smiled at me. Every day after that, we'd sit near each other. Sometimes we talked, sometimes we just existed side by side in that shared silence you only find among early commuters. One rainy Thursday, she handed me a small package. For your new beginnings, she said. Inside was a hand-knit scarf, the same sunny yellow she'd been working on. You always look a little tired, she added with a wink. I wore that scarf the day I quit my job. I didn't have another lined up. I just knew I needed change. I never saw her again. But I think of her every time I wear it. It reminds me that kindness doesn't always have to be grand. Sometimes it's just two strangers, sharing quiet, soft mornings on a train.